All right, so now what I want to do is I want to show you how I go about showing my clipping that's going on in my image. So I'm on the Macintosh computer and I'm going to hold down the Option key. If you're on a PC or a Windows-based computer, hold down the Alt key. And if I were to actually click on the slider for the exposure, I can see where I'm clipping information. I'm clipping information in the Harley-Davidson neon sign, and I'm clipping information in the blue sky. At least I know now where this is being clipped, and I'm going to sit here and say to myself, what if I was to play with this? And if I take this and move it over, you can see that I'm increasing it. So what if I was to actually just come back and pull this back a little bit? So I'm going to go and I'm going to even it out at -15. Now I'm going to come over here and play with my shadows. This amount of clipping in my shadow areas is, pretty darn close to acceptability as far as I'm concerned. I like my image to have a little bit more punch than not, so I may want to bring this up to maybe 10, even 11. Look at this, I go up to 30, I still got the clipping going on. If I come up to 100, that flattened my image up quite a lot and made it look like garbage, but what I'm getting at is I still have that clipping stuff. No matter what I do, I still have clipped pixels in the shadows. So now I have to sit there and determine, is it acceptable or not? And is this making any difference? Let's see. Am I pulling away some of the stuff there? Maybe. So maybe I'll come in here and do 10. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down to the whites. The whites are my extreme highlight details and the blacks are my extreme shadow details. And if I was to click on this, you can see that I have that. And if I go this way, I'm going to increase. So maybe what I need to do is pull back on that a little bit. See, no matter how much I pull back on this, if you take a look at the histogram, I still have that red spiking line going on. So what that tells me is no matter what I do, I'm not going to get rid of that. So I'm not going to use that as something that I absolutely have to get rid of and all that fun stuff. Let's take a look at the blacks. Option Alt clicking on that slider shows me this. If I were to increase this a little bit, you see how I'm pulling away from the histogram? Actually, I'm at that point. I'm just going to click my cursor in there and I'm just going to raise it up a little bit to go to, let's say, 20. I'm going to hold this down just to see what 20 looks like, and that's acceptable to me, and what's going on in the histogram is somewhat acceptable to me. Let's pull this back down a little bit. There you go. I'm going to stick at 18 because I like the way it climbs out of there. And I've got that sitting there. So there's my image as far as working with these sliders go today. Tomorrow I may interpret it a little bit different, and this happens with all of our images. Now, I have indicated that I believe all images require some clarity. The newer cameras, not so much as the older cameras, but still they do need some clarity. And it all has to do with the junk that's generated by our digital cameras. And I don't care what camera you have, there's junk that's generated, flatness that's generated, and we need to boost some of that up. So, I'm going to go give it 10, and I'm going to give it 20, and possibly a little bit more. Now, what I want to do is I want to zoom in. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to choose 100% so we can actually see what's going on. I'm going to put my cursor inside here and I'm just going to scoot over to this end here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit 0. With that highlighted, I'm going to hit 0 and I want to see if there's a visual difference between one and the other. Do you see the difference? I'm going to go up 20. You see how I've given a little bit of extra kick and punch? Sometimes I even say maybe 30. This camera here could probably live with a 30 value in the clarity. I'm going to come back down here. I'm going to choose Fit View so I can get my image to show up in the whole window here. And then I'm going to look at the vibrance and the saturation. The difference between vibrance and saturation is subtle, but it is there. If I'm playing with the saturation slider, and if I move the saturation slider all the way to the right, I'm going to increase the vibrancy of every pixel in the image, regardless of whether it's a dull pixel or a vibrant pixel. If I take that slider and move it to the left, I will take all the color out of the image. I will desaturate it. The vibrance slider is similar to the saturation, except, and there's two things that it's going to do that's differently. One is the vibrance slider, not the slider itself, but the application when using the slider, all right, looks at the whole image and finds pixels that are already saturated and says we're going to leave you alone and we're going to bring up the saturation of the less saturated pixels. So we don't force the already saturated stuff over the top. All the while, it's going to try to ignore red. Now, if I were to take the saturation slider and drag it all the way to the left, you can see desaturated took out all the color. If I put that back to 0, and if I take the vibrance slider and take that all the way down, you can see that it took out all the color, but it tried to ignore the red. That's the difference between the two sliders. So what I may do is I may give that a 20 just to give it a little bit of pop. There you go. I think that works out well. If you don't, that's up to you. You can change it to whatever it is you want it to do. I like a little bit of vibrancy added to my images. Some people don't. I particularly like it. I didn't play with the contrast in here, and the reason why I didn't play with the contrast at this point is because I already had stuff that went to the end on the highlights and the shadow areas. This is a great starting point for this image. In the next video, I will talk about the Tone Curve tab and how we can alter our contrast in a more specific manner than using the contrast slider.